In the quiet suburbs of Silverwood Heights, life moved at a predictable pace. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns, colorful flower beds, and houses that all looked like they belonged in a postcard. It was the kind of place where people waved hello as they drove by and kids rode their bikes down empty cul-de-sacs. But beneath the surface of this picture-perfect neighborhood lay simmering tensions. Rules about how tall your grass could grow or what color your mailbox had to be weren't just suggestions. They were enforced with an almost religious zeal by the local homeowners association, HOA. One Saturday morning, the calm rhythm of the neighborhood was interrupted when a new resident decided to do something unusual. This man, who had recently moved into the area with his family, wasn't one for attention. He kept to himself, blending into the background despite his commanding presence. What his neighbors didn't know was that he served in one of the most elite military units in the world. Years spent training and operating in high-pressure situations had taught him patience, discipline, and how to stay cool under fire. But today, it wasn't international conflicts on his mind. It was something much simpler, honoring those who had given everything. He stepped outside early that morning, tools in hand, ready to install a small flagpole in his front yard. To him, it wasn't just a decoration. It was a tribute to fallen heroes, a way to show gratitude for sacrifices made by so many. As he worked, sweat dripping down his face, he felt a sense of pride. Little did he know, this simple act would soon put him at the center of a bizarre and dangerous situation. Around noon, two men rolled through the neighborhood in a beat-up white truck. Their vests read "Neighborhood Security," but anyone paying close attention might have noticed they didn't quite look official. These self-appointed enforcers prided themselves on keeping the community in line, even if their methods sometimes bordered on overzealous. They patrolled the streets looking for violations. Things like unkempt driveways or holiday decorations left up too long. Some residents found them annoying but harmless. Others avoided them altogether. When the two men spotted the flagpole going up in the newcomer's yard, they slowed down. One leaned out the window, squinting. "What's this guy doing?" He muttered to his partner. Without hesitation, they parked their truck and got out, walking toward the house with an air of authority that seemed exaggerated for such a mundane task. The taller of the two approached first, clipboard in hand. "Excuse me," he called out, his tone sharp and accusatory. "You can't put that there. It's against HOA rules." The homeowner paused, turning to face them. His expression remained calm, but there was a glimmer of determination in his eyes. "This is within my rights," he replied evenly. "I'm honoring veterans today." But the taller man wasn't satisfied. Behind him, his companion shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting near the holster strapped to his hip. Something about the scene felt off, though neither man could explain why. What started as a minor disagreement was about to take a turn no one saw coming. The homeowner stood tall, his broad shoulders relaxed but exuding a quiet confidence that seemed out of place in this otherwise ordinary suburban setting. His calm demeanor only added to the tension brewing between him and the two men now standing on his property. The taller one, clipboard still clutched tightly in his hand, frowned as if he couldn't believe someone would dare challenge him. "It doesn't matter what you're trying to do," the man snapped, his voice rising slightly. "You can't just go breaking the rules like this. This is a neighborhood, not some free-for-all zone." He gestured vaguely toward the half-installed flagpole, as though it were an eyesore ruining the pristine look of the street. To him, it wasn't about honoring veterans or paying respects. It was about control. Control over how things looked, how people acted, and who followed their so-called guidelines. The homeowner didn't flinch. Instead, he wiped his hands on a rag and took a step closer, making sure to maintain eye contact without appearing confrontational. "I understand where you're coming from," he said slowly, his tone measured and respectful. "But I'm well within my rights here. There's no rule that says I can't display a flag, especially when it's meant to honor those who served." His words hung in the air, but they didn't seem to register with either of the two men. If anything, the shorter one, the one wearing the holster, looked even more irritated. He adjusted his stance, shifting uncomfortably while glancing back at his partner. It was clear he wanted to assert dominance, to show this newcomer who was really in charge around here. "You think you know better than us?" The shorter man shot back, his voice louder now. "We've been living here for years. We enforce the rules around here. You want to break them? Fine, but don't expect us to sit back and let you disrespect everyone else." The homeowner raised an eyebrow, sensing the situation escalating. He knew better than to rise to the bait. Years of experience had taught him that staying calm in moments like these was key. But deep down, frustration bubbled beneath the surface. How could something as meaningful as honoring fallen soldiers become twisted into a petty argument about neighborhood aesthetics? Still, he kept his emotions in check, choosing instead to appeal to reason. "Look," he said firmly, taking another small step forward. "This isn't about disrespecting anyone. It's about remembering those who gave everything for our freedom, including the right to fly a flag. Surely you can see that?" For a split second, there was silence. The taller man glanced at his partner, uncertainty flickering across his face. Maybe they'd pushed too far. Maybe this wasn't worth it. But then the shorter man stepped forward abruptly, his hand moving instinctively toward the holster strapped to his hip. In one swift motion, he pulled out a gun and pointed it directly at the homeowner. Time seemed to freeze. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, unsure of what they were seeing. Was this real? Could two men claiming to represent the HOA actually pull a weapon over something as trivial as a flagpole? The homeowner froze mid-motion, his hands still visible in front of him. Despite the sudden threat, his expression remained steady, almost eerily composed. Inside, however, adrenaline surged through his veins. Every fiber of his being told him to react, but not yet. Not until he understood exactly what he was dealing with. The shorter man sneered, clearly enjoying the power he thought he held. "Now listen up," he barked, waving the gun around recklessly. "You don't talk back to us. Got it? You follow the rules, or we make sure you regret it." His words dripped with arrogance, but there was also a nervous edge to his voice, like he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else that he was in control. The homeowner didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied the man carefully, noting every detail, the way his grip on the gun wavered slightly, the beads of sweat forming on his forehead, the subtle shift in weight as he tried to appear bigger and more intimidating than he actually was. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the homeowner spoke. His voice was calm but carried a weight that demanded attention. "Put the gun down," he said evenly, his eyes locked onto the shorter man. "Right now. Before this goes somewhere none of us want it to." There was something about the way he said it, something unshakable, that made the shorter man hesitate. For the first time since pulling the weapon, doubt crept into his expression. Who was this guy? Why wasn't he scared? And why did it feel like he was the one losing control of the situation? The taller man, sensing the growing unease, tried to intervene. "Come on, buddy," he muttered, tugging at his partner's arm. "Let's just go. This isn't worth it." But the shorter man wasn't ready to back down, not yet. He tightened his grip on the gun, his jaw clenched in defiance. "No," he growled. "He needs to learn a lesson." What happened next would change everything for both the homeowner and the entire neighborhood. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. The shorter man stood there, his gun still pointed squarely at the homeowner, his chest rising and falling rapidly as if he were trying to convince himself that he was in charge. But something wasn't right. The homeowner's calm demeanor, his unwavering gaze, and the quiet authority in his voice, it all seemed to throw the shorter man off balance. For someone who clearly thrived on intimidation, this lack of fear was unsettling. "You think you're tough, huh?" The shorter man spat, his voice cracking just slightly under the weight of his own bravado. "You think you can just ignore us and do whatever you want? Well, let me tell you something. This is our neighborhood, and we don't take orders from people like you." The words hung there, heavy and loaded, but the homeowner didn't bite. He'd faced far worse situations than this. Situations where panic or anger could mean life or death. This wasn't even close to that level, but he knew better than to underestimate anyone holding a weapon. Instead, he kept his focus sharp, his mind racing through scenarios while maintaining an outward appearance of complete control. "Listen," the homeowner said again, his tone firm but not aggressive. "I'm not here to fight with you. I'm just trying to honor those who sacrificed everything for us. That includes following laws, not breaking them. So why don't you put the gun down before someone gets hurt?" It was a calculated move. By appealing to logic and subtly reminding the man of the potential consequences, he hoped to de-escalate the situation without giving him room to feel cornered. But the shorter man wasn't ready to back down. If anything, the mention of laws seemed to infuriate him further. "Oh, now you're talking about laws?" he sneered, taking another step closer. Funny coming from someone who thinks they can just break HOA rules whenever they feel like it. At this point, the taller man, the one with the clipboard, was visibly sweating. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of dread. He tugged at his partner's sleeve again, whispering urgently, "Dude, come on. Let's go. This isn't worth it." But the shorter man shrugged him off, shaking his head. "No way. Not until he learns a lesson." Then, turning back to the homeowner, he added, "And trust me, buddy, you're gonna regret messing with us." By now, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered at a safe distance, some peeking out from behind curtains, others standing cautiously on their porches. No one dared to intervene, but whispers rippled through the group. Who were these two men with their fake security vests and holstered guns? And why were they pointing a weapon at a neighbor over something as trivial as a flagpole? The homeowner noticed the gathering crowd too. While part of him appreciated the support, another part worried that things could spiral further out of control if more people got involved. He needed to end this quickly, but carefully. One wrong move, and the situation could turn deadly. With slow, deliberate movements, he adjusted his stance, positioning himself slightly sideways. It was a supple shift, almost imperceptible, but it served two purposes. It made him appear less confrontational, while also putting him in a better position to react if necessary. Years of training had drilled into him the importance of body language, and he used it now to project calmness rather than hostility. Then, in a voice louder and more commanding than before, he addressed the shorter man directly. "Put the gun down." Each word landed like a hammer, leaving no room for misinterpretation. "Do it now, or face the consequences." For a moment, time seemed to stop. The shorter man froze, his grip on the gun tightening as he processed what he just heard. There was something different about the homeowner's tone this time, something that sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't anger or aggression, it was authority. Pure, unshakable authority. And then it hit him. This wasn't just some random guy. Whoever this homeowner was, he carried himself like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Someone who wouldn't hesitate to act if pushed too far. The realization dawned slowly, but it was enough to make the shorter man falter. His arm lowered slightly, though he still clutched the gun tightly. Sweat poured down his face as he glanced nervously between the homeowner and the growing crowd of onlookers. What are you gonna do?" he stammered, his earlier bravado crumbling. "Call the cops?" "Go ahead. See if I care." The homeowner didn't respond immediately. Instead, he held the man's gaze, letting the silence speak for itself. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he said, "I already did." It was true. Unbeknownst to the two men, one of the neighbors had called 911 the moment the gun came out. Now, faint sirens could be heard in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The sound seemed to jolt the shorter man back to reality. Panic flashed across his face as he realized the gravity of the situation. "We didn't do anything wrong," he shouted defensively, glancing at his partner. "He's the one breaking the rules." But the taller man was done. He threw up his hands in frustration and muttered, "This was a bad idea. A really bad idea." Without another word, he turned and started walking back toward their truck, leaving his partner standing alone. The shorter man hesitated, torn between doubling down and cutting his losses. In the end, self-preservation won out. With a final glare at the homeowner, he reluctantly lowered the gun and followed his partner, muttering curses under his breath. As the two men climbed into their beat-up white truck and sped away, the homeowner let out a long, controlled breath. It was over for now. But he knew this wasn't the last he'd hear of them. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, slicing through the tense silence that had settled over the neighborhood. Neighbors who had been watching from their windows or porches now stepped outside cautiously, curious about what was happening. Some clutched their phones, ready to record. Others exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether they should stay or retreat indoors. The homeowner stood motionless in his yard, still holding the tools he'd been using earlier, his face calm but unreadable. When the first police car screeched to a halt at the end of the street, followed by another and then a third, it became clear this wasn't going to blow over quietly. Officers spilled out of their vehicles, hands resting on their holsters as they assessed the scene. One officer approached the homeowner immediately, his voice firm but measured. "Sir, are you okay? What happened here?" The homeowner nodded, keeping his tone steady and respectful. "I'm fine," he said, gesturing toward the half-installed flagpole. These two men showed up claiming I was violating some HOA rule. When I tried to explain myself, one of them pulled a gun on me. The officer's expression hardened. He glanced around the crowd of neighbors, many of whom were eager to share their version of events. A few pointed down the street, where the beat-up white truck had come to an abrupt stop near the corner. The two men inside looked panicked, realizing there was no escape. Within moments, officers surrounded the vehicle, ordering the pair to step out with their hands raised. As the taller man climbed out reluctantly, his clipboard dangling uselessly from his hand, the shorter man, the one with the gun, was visibly shaking. His bravado from earlier had vanished completely, replaced by wide-eyed fear. When officers discovered the firearm still tucked into his holster, they wasted no time cuffing both men and reading them their rights. Meanwhile, back in the homeowner's yard, the questioning continued. Another officer asked him to recount the details of the confrontation, while a third took statements from witnesses. Several neighbors spoke up, describing how the two men had driven through the area before, often acting as self-appointed enforcers for rules most people didn't even know existed. One elderly woman shook her head disapprovingly, saying, "They've always been troublemakers. I just never thought they'd go this far." But the homeowner wasn't interested in vilifying anyone, at least not yet. Instead, he focused on answering the officers' questions clearly and honestly. When one of them asked if he had any identification proving his military background, he hesitated for a moment. Then, pulling out his phone, he dialed a number he rarely used. "You'll want to speak to my commanding officer," he told the officer calmly. "He can verify who I am and what I do." This revelation caught everyone off guard, including the officers. One of them raised an eyebrow, intrigued but skeptical. "And what exactly is it that you do?" he asked. The homeowner didn't elaborate beyond saying, "Let's just say I've spent years training for situations like this." It was cryptic enough to pique curiosity but vague enough to avoid revealing sensitive information. Within minutes, his commanding officer was on the line, confirming not only his identity but also his status as an active member of one of the most elite units in the military. The officers exchanged glances, their respect for the homeowner visibly increasing. They finished taking his statement and assured him they'd handle the rest. Meanwhile, the two men were loaded into separate patrol cars, their faces pale and defeated. As the crowd dispersed, murmurs spread quickly. "Did you hear? That guy's Delta Force. No wonder he stayed so calm. Can you believe those idiots pulled a gun on ***? For the homeowner, though, the attention was uncomfortable. He wasn't looking for praise or recognition. All he wanted was to finish installing the flagpole and move on with his day. But as he turned back to his tools, a young boy from the neighborhood ran up to him, wide-eyed and awestruck. "Are you really a superhero?" the kid asked innocently. The homeowner chuckled softly, kneeling down to meet the boy's gaze. "No, I'm not a superhero," he replied gently. "I'm just someone who tries to do the right thing, even when it's hard." His words resonated deeply, not just with the child but with everyone listening. By the time the police wrapped up their investigation and left, the mood in the neighborhood had shifted entirely. What had started as a tense standoff had transformed into a moment of reflection and perhaps even inspiration for those who witnessed it. But the story wasn't over yet. News of the incident quickly spread beyond Silverwood Heights, drawing national attention. Reporters descended on the quiet suburb, eager to interview the homeowner and learn more about the bizarre encounter. For once, the spotlight wasn't on the HOA or its questionable enforcers. It was on a man whose quiet strength and unshakable principles reminded everyone of what truly mattered: honor, respect, and standing up for what's right, even in the face of danger. By the next morning, the story had exploded far beyond the quiet streets of Silverwood Heights. Local news outlets picked it up first, running headlines like, Homeowner stands ground against armed HOA enforcers, and military veteran faces down fake cops in suburban showdown. But it didn't stop there. Within hours, national networks caught wind of the incident, turning what had started as a neighborhood dispute into a nationwide conversation. Reporters swarmed the area, setting up cameras on lawns and knocking on doors in search of soundbites. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves were now eager to share their thoughts. Some praised the homeowner for his composure and courage, calling him a hero. Others admitted they had always found the so-called HOA security team unsettling, but never imagined things would escalate to this point. For the homeowner, the sudden attention was overwhelming and unwelcome. He hadn't asked for any of this. All he'd wanted was to honor fallen soldiers by flying a flag in his yard. Now his face was plastered across TV screens, and strangers were showing up at his doorstep hoping for interviews. When a reporter finally managed to corner him, microphone in hand, he handled the situation with the same calm demeanor that had gotten him through the confrontation the day before. "I'm not looking for fame or recognition," he told her plainly, standing beside the now fully installed flagpole. "This isn't about me. It's about remembering those who gave everything so we could live freely, including the freedom to display a flag without fear. What happened yesterday shouldn't have happened. No one should ever feel threatened in their own home." His words resonated deeply, striking a chord with viewers across the country. Social media lit up with hashtags like #RespectTheFlag and #StandWithHeroes as people shared stories of their own run-ins with overzealous HOAs or self-appointed neighborhood watchdogs. Many applauded the homeowner's restraint, pointing out how easily the situation could have turned deadly if he hadn't kept his cool. Others criticized the two men involved, labeling them as bullies who had let their egos spiral out of control. As for the pair themselves, they quickly became pariahs. Once proud of their role as enforcers, they now faced harsh scrutiny, not just from the public, but also from the very organization they claimed to represent. The HOA board issued a statement distancing itself entirely from the duo, calling their actions unauthorized, reckless, and unacceptable. Legal troubles piled on top of the humiliation. Both men were charged with impersonating law enforcement officers and brandishing a firearm unlawfully. Their makeshift uniforms and beat-up truck became symbols of misplaced authority, mocked online and ridiculed in late-night talk shows. But while the fallout dominated headlines, something unexpected began happening in Silverwood Heights. The incident forced residents to take a hard look at themselves and the kind of community they wanted to build. For years, strict rules and rigid enforcement had created an atmosphere of division rather than unity. People whispered behind closed doors about violations and fines, too afraid to speak openly for fear of retribution. Now, though, conversations shifted. Neighbors started talking not just about the drama that unfolded, but about how to prevent anything like it from happening again. A group of concerned residents organized a meeting at the local community center, inviting everyone to attend. The turnout was impressive, filling the room with faces both familiar and new. At first, tensions ran high. Some argued passionately against the HOA altogether, suggesting it had grown too powerful. Others defended its purpose, emphasizing the importance of maintaining property values and order. But slowly, the tone softened. People listened. They shared personal experiences, some funny, others frustrating, all aimed at finding common ground. Out of these discussions came a surprising outcome, a renewed sense of connection. Residents formed committees focused on fostering inclusivity and mutual respect instead of policing each other's yards. One initiative even encouraged neighbors to decorate their homes however they liked, promoting creativity over conformity. Another pushed for clearer guidelines around HOA enforcement, ensuring decisions were made democratically rather than arbitrarily. The homeowner attended a few of these meetings, though he preferred to stay in the background. Still, his presence inspired others to step up. When someone suggested creating a memorial garden in the park to honor veterans, he offered to help design it. The idea gained traction quickly, uniting the community around a cause bigger than themselves. Funds poured in, and volunteers showed up in droves to plant flowers, install benches, and erect a plaque dedicating the space to those who served. Through it all, the homeowner remained humble. In interviews, he continued to downplay his role in the events, focusing instead on the broader lessons learned. "We're all human," he said during one particularly poignant moment. "We make mistakes. We let emotions get the better of us sometimes. But at the end of the day, we have a choice, to divide or to unite. I hope this experience helps people choose unity." And for Silverwood Heights it did. The flagpole in the homeowner's yard no longer stood alone. It symbolized resilience, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood transformed. Where once there had been tension and distrust, there was now understanding and camaraderie. And though life returned to its usual rhythm, the memory of that Saturday morning lingered. A reminder that even in the most ordinary places, extraordinary moments can spark change. The weeks that followed the incident brought a mix of emotions for everyone in Silverwood Heights. For the two men who had pulled the gun, life became a nightmare they couldn't escape. Their faces were everywhere, on TV, in newspapers, and even on social media, memes mocking their absurd attempt to enforce HOA rules with firearms. Jobs were lost, friendships strained, and reputations shattered. The charges against them weren't just legal hurdles, they were personal embarrassments that followed them wherever they went. Meanwhile, the homeowner found himself thrust into an unfamiliar spotlight. Strangers stopped him at grocery stores and gas stations, thanking him for standing up not only to bullies, but also for something bigger, a principle. "You didn't back down," one woman told him as she shook his hand. "That's what real strength looks like." While he appreciated the sentiment, it wasn't attention he craved. He had acted out of necessity, not heroism. Yet people saw something in him, a quiet resolve, a refusal to let fear dictate his actions. And it inspired them. But inspiration wasn't limited to strangers. His own family noticed a shift within their tight-knit circle. His kids, who had watched wide-eyed from inside the house during the confrontation, began asking questions about bravery and doing the right thing. One evening, sitting around the dinner table, his youngest child looked up at him and asked, "Dad, were you scared when that man pointed the gun at you?" He paused, fork halfway to his mouth, before answering honestly, "Yeah, I was scared. Anyone would be. But being scared doesn't mean you stop doing what's right. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones we have to make anyway." His words stuck with them long after dessert was cleared away. It wasn't just a lesson in courage, it was a lesson in humanity. Life is messy, complicated, and often unfair. But how we respond to those challenges defines us more than anything else. For the neighborhood, the ripple effects of the incident continued to unfold. The Memorial Garden project gained momentum, becoming a symbol of unity and healing. Families came together to plant trees, lay stones, and paint murals honoring veterans. Kids played nearby while parents swapped stories, laughter filling the air where tension once lingered. The plaque at the center of the garden read simply, "Asterisk in memory of those who served, so we may live free asterisk." It wasn't just a tribute, it was a promise. A promise to remember the sacrifices made by others and to honor them by treating each other with kindness and respect. The flagpole in the homeowner's yard became part of this greater narrative. Neighbors passing by would nod approvingly, some stopping to thank him personally. Others started displaying flags themselves, turning the streets into a sea of red, white, and blue. Yet, amidst all the positivity, there were still moments of reflection. During another community meeting, a young mother stood up and shared her thoughts. "I used to think this neighborhood was perfect because everything looked nice," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But now I realize perfection isn't about matching mailboxes or perfectly trimmed hedges. It's about how we treat each other. And maybe we haven't been as kind as we should have been." Her honesty struck a chord. People nodded in agreement, some wiping away tears. They knew she was right. Years of nitpicking over minor infractions had created walls between neighbors instead of bridges. Now they were determined to rebuild those connections, not through rules but through compassion. As time passed, the story of the homeowner and the fake HOA enforcers faded from national headlines, replaced by newer dramas elsewhere. But in Silverwood Heights, it remained a defining moment, a turning point that reshaped the community forever. Conversations shifted from complaints about noise ordinances to ideas for block parties. Fences that had once separated yards became gathering spots for weekend barbecues. Even the HOA softened its stance, adopting policies that prioritized inclusivity over rigidity. The homeowner eventually returned to his quiet life, content to blend into the background again. He resumed his routine, helping coach his son's soccer team and teaching self-defense classes at the local YMCA. Though he never sought recognition, his actions left an indelible mark on those around him. When disputes arose, as they inevitably do in any neighborhood, people remembered the calm authority he displayed during the standoff. They reminded each other to take a step back, breathe, and find solutions rather than escalate conflicts. And then there was the flagpole. Standing tall in his front yard, it served as both a reminder and a beacon. To outsiders, it might have seemed like just another decoration. But to those who lived in Silverwood Heights, it represented resilience, justice, and the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. Every breeze that rustled the flag carried whispers of change, a testament to the fact that even in the most ordinary places, extraordinary things can happen when people choose courage over fear, unity over division, and respect over control. Life moved forward, as it always does. But the lessons learned that Saturday morning stayed with everyone, woven into the fabric of their everyday lives. Because sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up for what's right to remind us of the values that truly matter. Months later, the neighborhood of Silverwood Heights felt like a different place altogether. The transformation wasn't just visible, it was tangible. Streets that had once been lined with tension and whispered grievances now buzzed with laughter and shared moments. Kids raced their bikes down cul-de-sacs while parents chatted over fences, cups of coffee in hand. It wasn't perfect, no community ever is, but it was better, much better. The homeowner who had stood his ground that fateful Saturday morning became something of a quiet legend in the area. People didn't treat him differently. He was still the same reserved, humble man who preferred to stay out of the spotlight. But they respected him deeply. His actions had sparked a chain reaction, reminding everyone that courage doesn't always roar. It often whispers, steady and unyielding, even when faced with fear or intimidation. One crisp autumn afternoon, the neighborhood came together for its first annual Unity Day, an event born out of the conversations and reflections that followed the incident. Tables were set up along the main street, laden with homemade pies, grilled burgers, and colorful decorations. Music played softly in the background as families mingled, sharing stories and laughter. At the center of it all stood the memorial garden, now fully completed and vibrant with life. Flowers bloomed in every shade imaginable, and the plaque gleamed under the golden sunlight. During the celebration, a local pastor took the stage to say a few words. He spoke about resilience, forgiveness, and the importance of standing together, even in the face of disagreements. Then, turning to the homeowner, he invited him to join him on stage. The crowd erupted into applause, urging him forward despite his obvious reluctance. When he finally stepped up, hands shoved deep into his pockets, the cheers softened into respectful silence. For a moment, he simply stood there, scanning the sea of familiar faces. Finally, he cleared his throat and began to speak. "I didn't do anything special," he said, his voice carrying a sincerity that silenced any lingering murmurs. "I just tried to do what I thought was right. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from everything that happened, it's this: we're stronger when we work together than when we tear each other apart." His words hung in the air, simple yet profound. They weren't groundbreaking or revolutionary. They were human, and that's what made them resonate so deeply. People nodded, some wiping away tears, others exchanging knowing glances. In that moment, it wasn't about the flagpole or the gun or the headlines. It was about connection, about choosing understanding over judgment, patience over anger, and love over fear. After the speech, the festivities continued, but the mood had shifted slightly. Conversations turned reflective, with neighbors sharing how the events of the past year had changed them. One elderly woman admitted she used to call the HOA hotline whenever someone's lawn looked unkempt. Now, she said with a sheepish smile, "I bring them cookies instead." A young father confessed he'd learned to let go of petty frustrations, focusing instead on building relationships with those around him. Even the HOA board members joined in, promising to prioritize kindness and flexibility moving forward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the homeowner slipped away from the crowd unnoticed. He walked back to his house, where the flagpole stood proudly in the fading light. Leaning against the porch railing, he gazed at it for a long moment, lost in thought. He thought about the men who had confronted him, wondering where they were now and whether they'd learned anything from their mistakes. He thought about the neighbors who had rallied around him, proving that communities can grow stronger after hardship. And he thought about the flag fluttering gently above, a symbol of sacrifice and freedom. And of the everyday battles fought not with weapons, but with words, actions, and choices. Later that night, as he tucked his youngest child into bed, the boy looked up at him and asked, "Dad, will people remember what happened here?" The homeowner smiled, brushing a strand of hair off the boy's forehead. "Maybe," he replied softly. "But it's not about being remembered. It's about doing the right thing, even when no one's watching. That's what matters." And with that, he kissed his son goodnight, closing the door behind him. Outside, the neighborhood settled into peaceful quiet, the kind that comes only after storms have passed and skies have cleared. Life in Silverwood Heights wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was richer, fuller, and more connected because of the lessons learned. Because sometimes, the smallest acts of courage ripple outward, touching lives in ways we might never fully understand. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to stand firm, not out of pride, but out of principle, to remind us of the values that truly bind us together.